My journey into adulthood, I guess I'm going to go quite a way back because I grew up quite fast. So you would be amazed how easy it is to go off the rails in Wiltshire, to be honest. Certainly 30 odd years ago. So people would let you drink in pubs pretty young.
Hello grown-ups, and welcome to this week's episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up with me, your host, Sam Cooper-Gray. This week we are joined by Liz Bradford. Liz is going to take us on an international journey, starting in a remote farm in the UK, moving to Australia, to Hong Kong, and then back to the UK, and both her personal and her business journey while she navigated the world of being a grown-up. So please join me in welcoming Liz to the podcast. So Liz, welcome. And my first question, as ever, is tell us a little bit about your journey into adulthood.
First of all, thank you for having me. My journey into adulthood, I guess I'm going to go quite a way back because I grew up quite fast. Well, compared to some of your guests, maybe not, but it seemed that way at the time. I probably had to start growing up quite quickly when I was about 10 years old. Between that time, my parents, I'm the third child of four, which is why I'm so trappy, but big family, not the happiest of marriages, I think it's fair to say. So they had some challenges. And as a result, the environment in which we were growing up wasn't particularly stable or secure. So I was the third child, but also the eldest daughter. And so have that combination of them feeling very, very accountable for everything and everyone. So I started to grow up pretty fast at that point. And then, as many, I think, young adults felt I could take on the world and everything else. But actually, I grew up on a farm in the middle of Wiltshire. I didn't know that much. Right. Probably ended up going quite quickly off the rails and learning a lot about the world. So I would say very fast into adulthood. And then I've probably carried some of that, I don't want to use the term recklessness, but certainly risk appetite through with the rest of my career so far.
So, grew up quite remotely. Tell us a little bit about going off the rails then.
So you would be amazed how easy it is to go off the rails in Wiltshire, to be honest. Certainly 30 odd years ago. So people would let you drink in pubs pretty young. There's actually quite an active drug scene for recreational narcotics out in the countryside because there isn't a great deal else to do. And then just, all the usual stuff of hanging out with bad boys and being driven around in their cars when they were several years older than me at school. So going off the rails was kind of like really pushing the boundaries. But because from a parental perspective, the boundaries weren't even really there, it meant you could really push the boundaries. So it probably wasn't like looking back, far from ideal, but did give me a set of life skills and always the confidence that I would be able to take care of myself, I guess.
So that was your teenage self. So tell me a little bit more then about kind of finishing school, what you did first.
So finishing school, by that point, I was really honestly, I'm so grateful to my school because I should have been expelled about 3 times. I was getting into so much trouble on campus. I was running like a whole business we had like a boarding and a day school, and I was day. And I would basically phone up and put on a voice to be the parents of the boarders to get them out over the weekend and stuff. I got caught doing that. I found my school reports the other day because I was cleaning out our house. And found all of mine and my siblings' school reports, and just some of them are so scathing about me, and I feel really bad for my teachers. Like the time when I got caught smoking, and so that my punishment was to write an essay, and the complaint to my parent was the essay was about how to not get caught in the future, nothing to do with feeling bad about smoking at all. My English teacher said, Elizabeth has a very sharp mind. I only wish that on the time she chooses to engage with us, her tongue wasn't even sharper. So I was clearly just a massive handful, school-wise. I got predictably bad A-level results. I got an E for chemistry, and I then retook it and got an E again, at which point I gave up. But I then decided to go travelling for a little while. And I went travelling on my own. And I look back on it, and I think that's actually quite interesting because I've done a lot of travel in my career since. But the first place I decided to go as a 18-year-old in fact, was South Africa on my own and spend 2 months traveling up the garden route. So again, like just fairly fearless, I think, because things have been so rough at home. You were kind of like, well, I can take anything. How bad can it be? But it really taught me to be more independent. It was the first time I'd actually had to like sort all of my travel, budget for myself, do all of that stuff that you just take for granted as an adult, but unless someone teaches you when you're younger, you really have no real idea. And so that taught me a lot of life skills and a lot of appreciation by the time I got back for the stability, however limited, that there was back in the UK and home and everything else. And at that point I decided, well, stability's fine, but I'm going to go and move to London now and go to university. So I went through clearing into university, studied IT and Industrial Revolution, which now seems very fortuitous because obviously AI and transformation, but at the time I was just following the money because it was just before the dot-com bubble burst. So I went into IT thinking that's where the careers would be. About halfway through uni, the bubble burst, but I'd spent all of my student loan, obviously. And it was actually genuinely very interesting, so I decided to stay on. And then fell into banking after that. My first job was working at Swift, the banking infrastructure, and it was to get all of the member banks from an X25 phone network onto the internet. And then, banking thereafter for 21 years.
So we met while you were based in Australia, which was quite a few years ago now.
It is a while ago, isn't it?
So tell me the story of how you got from Swift, which I'm assuming started in London, to Australia.
So I started at Swift. I was there for maybe 3-4 years. I moved over into a couple of other firms. I ended up in an American bank, which was very fast-paced, moving very quickly, typically quite cutthroat. And for the first bit of it, I really thrived. I loved it. And then I found that I was succeeding, so they started to fast-track me, but I was just really not getting any energy from the job. And then one day my husband came home and just found me at the table in the kitchen, just in tears. And he was obviously very worried. He's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I just said, oh, they've told me they're promoting me. And he was like, well, this is exactly what you wanted. This is like, you were very driven and ambitious and everything else. And I was like, I just can't do it for another 2 years. I just can't keep going in there with my game face and going into war for 2 years. And so we hatched a plan. We had like a year left that we could actually get to Australia, age-wise and visa-wise. I applied for the visa. We did all of that stuff. And then, I packed up my life, my husband, everything else. And he was maybe 50-50 on whether he wanted to go or not. Moved us to the other side of the world. And that's when I started at HSBC. And I think I met you maybe a year or 2 years after that.
Wow. So, so again, I think, as you said, maybe the resilience you got when you were younger definitely having an impact on just picking your life up and going to Australia. You've then worked across the world and you're now back in the UK working for yourself. So tell me a little bit about that transition out of a big global corporate to running your own business and what you do.
So when I joined HSBC, I think we would all recognise now that what had happened when I was in London was burnout, but this is long before anyone ever talked about burnout or even knew that that was a thing, right? So I'm dating myself here, but that was 2011. I moved to Australia, joined HSBC. I was like, well, it's a British bank, commercial bank. I'm in Australia. I'll be on the beach by 4 p.m. Everything will be super chill. It'll basically be retirement, right? And of course, it didn't work out that way at all. And after about 18 months, I sort of got to this precipice where I was like, I realised I was burning out again. And I realised it can't possibly be the environment. It has to be something to do with me. Now, at the time, I was lucky enough to have been put onto a leadership development programme. And they gave me an executive coach as part of that who specialised in resilience building. So this was my first experience of any form of coaching. And I was just blown away. So she taught me about physical well-being, mental well-being, and connected well-being, and how those are the foundations, how those are the pillars of resilience. And that had just never occurred to me before. And if I were to fill up those as buckets, I realised I was really low on all of them, and that was what was driving me to feeling so de-energised and so burnt out. Now, A-type that I am, I got really into the physical side of it first because that's tangible and accessible. Trained as a personal trainer, had a side hustle then running boot camps on the beach for other burnt out bankers, and then cycled into work and did my job at the bank. But then over time that evolved and grew, and I got more and more into the coaching side as well. So qualified as a coach, ran executive coaching programs and wider coaching programs, as you know, through the bank, and then evolved the side hustle into that. So during that time, I also moved to Hong Kong, my husband and I got divorced, and it felt better to give him the continent of Australia and I would move. So I moved to Hong Kong and then had a great 6 years there, absolutely fantastic place, but came back to the UK just over a year ago and saw that my mother was very unwell, and decided to resign from the bank and make the side hustle the main hustle, so that I would have the flexibility to take care of her. And that had been an idea and a discussion with the bank as well for a long time, because that was where my passion lay. And the bigger and bigger my jobs would get at the bank, the less time I could spend even on the internal programs. So as you know, we met because you very kindly roped me in to a global employee resource group. And that's where, I would actually credit that with a large part of my success in my career, because that's where I learned the real value of networking. That's where I had the ability in the platform to really experience what making an impact feels. So I'm obviously eternally grateful to you, but it also showed me that there was more to life than the paycheck.
Yeah. And it was the same for me. I mean, I remember being told very junior that getting involved in this diversity stuff would be career limiting. And the absolute opposite was true, because the network it creates and the people you get to meet, and we used to talk to people all over the world all the time, and just the knowledge you would get from that was amazing, wasn't it? So you left the organisation, came back to the UK, looked after your mum. You've got your coaching and kind of business. I'm going to take you back a little bit before we move on to the next question. Tell me a little bit, and only because I know you created this, and I think it's one of the best programs we ever ran. Talk to me about coaching circles, because I think that is something that just epitomises the approach you take to helping people when it comes to coaching. So
coaching circles, first of all, I co-founded it, so I wouldn't want to take full credit for it at all. So I co-founded it, but the concept really is around giving leaders within the organization coaching capabilities. So we can all recognize, and this was pre-COVID, it was just at the beginning of sort of lockdowns and everything else, but we all know that leadership requires different styles and flexing now, but also that a lot of leaders are burning out because they don't have the ability to coach. They're just being very directive in their leadership. So coaching circles was a way of us helping them develop coaching skills, but also, more importantly, giving people, we effectively wanted to democratize every talent program we'd ever had access to and make that available to anyone who was willing to give the time. Because fundamentally, we have to recognize that a meritocracy is flawed as a concept. So even I came up in my career in the time when people were very much trying to get females into leadership positions and realized we didn't have the pipeline. So I was extremely lucky in that respect. I shamelessly grabbed that opportunity, and I do not apologize for that. And I felt that, yes, that was fine, but I looked around and everyone else on that program looked like me. Whereas it meant that a lot of people were being left behind. And there's this phenomenon called the broken rung, is that once you start getting put onto those talent programs, you get the skills, the network, and the confidence that means your trajectory accelerates at an almost exponential rate. And everyone else who didn't get put onto that program kind of bumps along but has a much lower thing. And what we wanted to do was close that gap by making it accessible. So yes, we took all of the kind of the skills and the concepts that you'd get on a talent program, and we put them into a program. They were packaged up beautifully by one of my co-founders and delivered very well. But primarily what it meant was within that coaching circle, you had a peer circle of 6 to 8 people, and you had a senior leader that you had access to once a month. And you would go through those topics around things like personal branding, core values. I'm trying to remember it now. It's been a while. Networking, stakeholder management, all of the sort of the human skills that help people get ahead as leaders. But really what we built was the ability to network as well. So you naturally had this organic network and a reason to be speaking to people. So yeah, I mean, we never expected it. I never expected it to be as successful as it was. I had one of my co-founders was particularly ambitious about it. And it's now at over 35,000 people, which I think is an incredible impact to have had. Bearing in mind, it cost like $248 for a SharePoint license. Yeah, it was all volunteer work. So
yeah, and I remember being a coach on it, and as a coach, it was amazing. I learned so much because I got to coach people and work with people and watch people grow that I'd never talked to before that were in different bits of the business. So I think it genuinely did make a difference. As you say, it's over 30,000 people have been through it now, which is phenomenal. Let me take you back then to your younger self. just going to go back to that 18-year-old self. She'd been a bit of a rebel. She'd somehow managed not to get kicked out of school, which I think is quite impressive. I see a theme because you touched on the fact that you'd already started a little bit of a side hustle business at school, which you got caught for. And then you did a side hustle in Australia as a PT. Yeah. So there's a theme. There's definitely a theme here. But if your 18-year-old self could see you today, what would she recognise in you?
She would recognise, it doesn't occur to me that I cannot do something. And it's something I see all the time in clients, particularly female clients when I'm coaching them, is often the biggest hurdle they need to get past is the limitation that they place on themselves. And in many ways, my upbringing, which was marred by depression and alcoholism and suicide attempts, it taught me at a very young age, no one owes you anything. So you can't, and it's not the healthiest, and my therapist, who is still making a fortune out of me, would always get me to say, it's not great to say, I don't need anyone, but it taught me that actually, if you give something a go, at the very worst, you're going to learn something, but there's a very good chance you will succeed. And I think we really set limitations on ourselves that if you look back how far you've come, you would never have believed it at the time because you didn't know what you didn't know. And the only way to find out is to give something a go. So she would definitely recognise that, like, I'm probably still ridiculously naive about whether something is doable or not.
And I love that because, you know, as your therapist says, you know, you're looking back on the skills that you learn, even though that was, you know, probably quite traumatic to go through, and that's what you took from it. Whereas I think some people would take and, well, I'm just not going to try then because I don't want to put myself out there. But what you took away from your upbringing and the challenges that it had was, you know, it can't be worse, so I might as well give it a go, right? What would she be blown away by? Like, if you're 18 or so, I can see you at herself now, and she'd recognise that, give everything a go, not occur that you won't achieve something. What would she go, wow, at?
I think it never would have occurred to me. She would be like, you've lived on 4 continents. Like, this is now my 4th continent. I'm 44, so I'm like ticking off 1 a decade now. So obviously I'm going to run out. But I think she would be blown away by just how much I'm still willing to pick myself up and throw myself into a situation. I do. And I absolutely credit the coach that I met that taught me about resilience for that. I obviously had a decent amount of grit before that. And then the other thing I think that she would really not recognise or be blown away by is self-compassion. I had none when I was that age, and I didn't know any better. But one of the things I've learned over time is it really makes you actually one of the strongest people alive. If you can have self-compassion, you can be empathetic to others. And if you can be empathetic to others, you can really push through and find the right outcomes for people. Whereas if you've just got that like black and white view without self-compassion, I think it's very, very hard to do. That's what makes people brittle.
So tell me, so to you, what is self-compassion? So tell me a little bit more, because I think that's really fascinating.
I think self-compassion for me, well, it's realising no one is perfect. My 18-year-old self, and even beyond, certainly the first sort of decade of my career, I would have said I was constantly striving for perfection, because I thought if everything was perfect, then no one could take it away. And I was completely in a bubble and I was independent if it was perfect. Self-compassion for me is more recognising that no one is perfect, and we all have doubts, and we all screw up, and we all, you know, make mistakes or say the wrong thing or hurt someone's feelings or hurt our own feelings. But actually, when you realise, well, that's just a fundamental part of the human condition, it makes it much easier to let other people in, but it also makes it much easier to understand other people a bit better.
So Liz, I love that self-compassion piece. I think it's so important. And I think, especially as women, I think we're really bad at it. I think we're really good at judging ourselves over everyone else. And the adage that comes to mind is the one on the aeroplane where it says, you know, you've got to put your own oxygen mask on before you try and put someone else's on. I'm going to move us on now to a question around decision making. And you've made lots of decisions to go and do lots of stuff in loads of different places, not least all your side hustles. What's the best decision you've ever made?
So I'm going to answer that in two ways, but it's all interconnected. So the very best decision I've made, and maybe I've got recency bias, is to resign from my job and go home and take care of my mum. And I know that sounds a bit soppy, but honestly, that's time that you couldn't get back. But what that has in common with every other best decision I've ever made, or secondary best decision, is going against the grain. So all of the decisions that I've made that people either said were like career suicide, which is what everyone said when I went to Australia, or, you know, going against sort of stigma and everything when I got divorced and then moved to Hong Kong and everything else. Like, there were a lot of decisions that I made in my life that people would not have made because they would have been worried about going against the grain, and even leaving a very stable job and going to take care of my mum. But you only get one life. That's my belief anyway. And in that life, you have like just 4,000 weeks on average. I plan on having a few more, but 4,000 weeks. And I just don't ever want to look back and think, I wish I hadn't made the safe choice then. And what if?
I think that's really powerful, because I think, you know, no one lies on their deathbed and says, I wish I'd worked an extra hour, right? Like that, no matter how hard families are, you know, to rock up at a time of need is a really important part of who we are, whether it's, you know, your biological family or your friends who are your family. You know, I remember when I lost my husband, just people just appeared out of nowhere, and you really knew who your friends were, and everyone was just, and you just think how lucky you are that you're in a position to take the time out to be able to do that. But I also love your going against the grain thing, because I think that does define you and what you do quite well, which is what I would say is I don't think I'd ever tell you couldn't do something, because I think you'd get that look in your eye and you'd do it anyway, just on principle.
Guaranteed way to motivate me to do anything is go, oh, you couldn't do that. It's like, hold my beer.
Yeah, it's something I recognise in myself, very much so, and I think it is linked to that kind of resilience and grit, however you get it in life, which is, don't tell me I can't do something. So on that theme, I think we get given a lot of advice, some good, some bad, some we listen to, some we don't. What's the best advice you've been given that you have completely ignored?
This one has been haunting me for decades. But the best advice I was given repeatedly by multiple people that I respect, and I chose to ignore because I just didn't want to do it, was network. Build genuine network. Now, I'm super introverted. I would hide in the toilets at events. That's how much I would try and avoid. Like, this is before the days of mobile phones. Now my mobile phone is my best friend, because I can just sit like that in a corner and pretend I don't need anyone. But honestly, it was after I met you, and it was through the work that we did that I realized how much I had short-circuited my own potential impact and delayed it, because I realized that network is not that hideous transactional thing of swapping business cards that I used to think it was. It's about building an authentic and organic network of relationships where you are adding more value than you're taking out, ideally. But that will then reward you with opportunities and exposure and fulfillment. I mean, to your point around people just appearing from nowhere to be around you, I spent a large part of my life just really wanting to be alone and protected and isolated, because that felt safe to me. But actually, it's once you put yourself out there. We're a tribe species, right? So being connected to other people is what drives us. We can't survive without it, even now. And so I really wish I had listen to those people. Some of them know who they are, because I've gone back to them and apologized, but they were absolutely right. And I give that advice, and I know full well that people are ignoring me when I say it, but it's the one piece that's haunted me for a long time.
Do you think it's partly because, especially when we joined the financial services industry, you know, for me, almost, 25 years ago, that it was talked about in a way which is, it wasn't supposed to be enjoyed, and it felt like it was supposed to be mercenary. You must network. whereas the way you've articulated it, exactly where I feel about networking is I always refused to network with people I didn't think could be part of my tribe, and it definitely had a knock-on effect, because I was like, I'm not going to network with people I don't like or I don't think I'm going to have something in common with just for the sake of networking. I think maybe when we were younger it was perceived as you have to go network with these people because they'll be useful to you, rather than building your tribe, which I think is what true valuable networking really is.
Yeah, and I think it felt very transactional. It felt very salesy. And like you were selling yourself, or at least trying to get something out of someone else. It felt very zero-sum game.
Yeah.
Whereas now, and the one thing I'll challenge you on in what you just said, and I don't know if it's still your perception now, but I would struggle to find a single human that I couldn't find common ground with. And that was a real revelation for me around, like, there may not be a natural click for my tribe, but we all have the same three fundamental needs: to be loved, to belong, and to be worthy. Like, it's, however, like, from whatever background, providing you could get over the language barrier, which my AirPods apparently magically can now do, it's hard to not find a point of connection if you really try.
Yeah.
But I would never have believed that 20, maybe even 10 years ago.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. I think there are some people I would now to consider part of my tribe that I definitely wouldn't have even considered that would potentially even be part of my tribe 10, 20 years ago. So I think you're right. And I think it is that networking piece. I definitely did the same. I ignored that advice earlier in my career because I didn't like the idea of it. It looked really hard. I never knew the right thing to say the minute someone like introduced themselves to me, and it takes real work. But once you get, it's like everything, right? Practice makes stuff a lot easier to do. You get practice and you see the value in it. It's something just becomes more natural as you get older, I think.
Yeah, and I think also the minute we realize the switch of, rather than when we're meeting someone thinking about what are they thinking about me, if we actually just focus on them and how they feel and what they need, all of that pressure goes away and suddenly we're connecting. Whereas if you're just always thinking, what am I going to say next and how am I going to impress this person, then it's never going to really work that well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that whenever I get asked for advice, I always say I'd wish my younger self would have known is stop worrying about what other people think, because they're all far too busy worrying about themselves. They're not thinking about you at all. So don't worry about it. Just go in there and be you, and that will work with someone, not with others, and that's okay. So moving on from the advice piece, I want to talk to you about a personal challenge. So we like to set our listeners every week a little personal challenge from each of our guests. So if you could set each of our listeners something they could do to challenge themselves, what would it be?
So it's gonna have to be about physical well-being, I'm afraid, because
that's okay.
That's where I start with all my clients and most interactions as well, because it's the foundation of everything, right? So our physical body determines it, and how we move it and what we do with it determines how we feel, how we interact, how we show up in the world, how long we live, how healthy those years are. So the challenge I would set is, what is one thing this week you can do to take care of yourself? It doesn't have to be burpees. It doesn't have to be training for a marathon. It could be yoga or some breathing exercises or some meditation. But how are you going to take care of yourself and your body this week?
Excellent. So we're going to set that as a challenge. And I'm going to tell you my thing this week is I've just found this great thing, which doesn't take very long, which is just body movement that gets your lymphatic system going in the morning. And you look like a crazy person, at least I do, because I did it in the mirror this morning and I looked hilarious. But it just gets you moving and it gets your lymphatic system awake. And you know what? I've now done it 4 days now, and the energy I feel in comparison to 5 days ago is crazy, and it literally takes a couple of minutes. So that's the one I've started with.
That's amazing. Maybe you could link to that and people could all try it. You could start a whole trend.
It is very funny. Maybe I won't video me doing it because I think I look slightly ridiculous, but maybe one of the people that I found on one of the social media channels.
That'll be viral though, Sam.
I know. I'm not sure I want that to go viral, but yeah. So we've somehow come to the end of the episode, and we've covered such an array of areas, from your growing up and the grit that gave you, the first early showings of being a businesswoman as a teenager with your side hustle, and that common theme of always wanting and having something on the side that potentially gave you more meaning than some of the day job stuff, through to, you know, the really meaningful stuff of coming home to look after your mum, and the business that you now run, which I know is very much based in your absolute passion to help others and help them be the best that they can be. So, last question we always ask in the podcast is, if the Beginner's Guide to the Grown Up actually became a book, from everything we've talked about today, or something else that you haven't touched on yet, what is the one piece of advice that you would want me to put in that guide?
It always comes back to the 4,000 weeks. So if you map out 4,000 weeks onto a wall chart and you cross one off every time, I can assure you are going to be more conscious of how you give your time to other people and what you're doing with your time. Because being focused on why we're here, and for each of us it's different, and what we can give is possibly the most rewarding thing, and it will open up avenues of opportunity you never knew were there. So my advice would be, always be aware that time is your most valuable commodity and spend it wisely.
I'm not sure I can add anything else to that. I think that's the perfect ending. So, Liz, thank you so much for being interviewed today. I've really enjoyed going through that journey. And even though we do know each other quite well, I've learnt a few new things about you, mostly how much of a hustle you did at secondary school. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today and learn a little bit more about your story and listen to your advice and your challenge.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sam. I'm honestly really honoured to even come on the podcast. I'm a long-time listener and a huge fan. So thank you very, very much.
Brilliant. Thanks. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up. Please do like, follow and subscribe wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts. Next week, we have Helen Gibson, MBE, joining us. She's going to talk to us about her international career, becoming a TED speaker and an author, and also about getting involved in her family business later in life. So please join us next week to listen to her story.